Hi guys, thanks so much for tuning in again with me today on the SH Weddings YouTube channel. I really do apologize, but I'm just going to let you guys know up front, this is a re-recorded video from the last video that I recorded, which is about reading and understanding your contracts when you sign them for your wedding. And the reason I had to re-record it and repost it actually was because when I was watching it after I had posted it this weekend, I realized that I did a horrible job editing this video, and I couldn't stand the fact that I'd put something out there that just really wasn't up to my standards. Not that I'm like, you know, a super professional at editing videos or making videos or anything like that, but I was repeating information, I was rambling like I was delirious, and I couldn't stand it. And luckily, because it hadn't had a lot of views yet, because I really hadn't promoted it a lot on YouTube, on Facebook and Twitter, I thought this was a really good opportunity to just take it down and re-record it. So I really do apologize. If you did watch that video, you know that I've been struggling with some sort of an illness the past week and a half. It started early last week, and I still actually do have a few symptoms, so I've really been struggling with that. I finally figured out what it is though. It's actually a side effect to a medication that I'm on, so I have it taken care of. I don't really want to go into any more detail other than that, but it could take a couple more days for me to get fully back to normal, but I know what it is. I'm totally fine, and I'm feeling somewhat normal again today, so I thought this would be a really good idea to go ahead and re-record that video and repost it for you. So I'm just going to go ahead and get started with this video, and it is, like I said, reading and understanding your contracts when you sign them for your wedding. Now, as far as signing contracts, I think the most complicated one that I really want to focus on today is your venue and or catering contract, and for the purpose of this video, I'm just going to be using venue contract, but it also refers to catering because it specifically deals with your final guest count when it gets closer to the wedding date. So with your venue, when you first sign your contract, you're going to have to provide some sort of an expected guest count. Now, one tip that I really want to stress for you guys is to really think about exactly how many people you think are going to come. I know that's really hard to predict, especially if you have a lot of guests that are being invited from out of town and even from other countries. Trust me, I totally understand that this is definitely something that's difficult to come up with. But definitely talk with your parents and see if they can help you out with this, see if guests could come to past weddings and see how it's been handled previously. But you don't want to just give a random number to your venue because it might get you into trouble a little bit later on. So you don't really want to overestimate a lot or underestimate a lot just because you could be held accountable for that guest count later on, and I'll explain why. When it gets to be 2 weeks from your wedding date, that's the cutoff date for most venue or catering contracts, about 2 weeks or 10 business days is when you have to give that final guest count to your venue. They need to order your food and drink, and they need to know that information about that time. So if they don't hear from you, they're going to go ahead and just use the expected guest count that's listed on the contract that you provided probably about a year ago. So you can see where people can kind of get into trouble with that. Usually in your contract, there is specific wording that says if we don't get an expected guest count from you by this date, we absolutely must go off of what's already been provided on the contract. So for example, let's say that when you first signed your contract, you put down 150 guests, and then as it got closer to the wedding and you got all of your RSVPs in, you're only expecting about 100. If you don't update your venue on that guest count, they're going to end up charging you for the full 150, and that there is 100% always verbiage in the contract that says the venue has every right to charge you for that amount and that you will be held responsible for paying it. So you can see where you could end up having to pay an extra few $1,000s, because if you're paying, you know, $100 per head for your meal and drinks, you're going to be held responsible for that, and it totally sucks. And it can be totally prevented if you just read your contract ahead of time and completely understand that. Now, some venues and caterers will have a minimum as far as what has to be met. So for example, let's use that 150 guest count again. Let's say when you first signed, you said we're expecting 150 guests. Now, as it gets closer to your wedding, you're only expecting, let's say 100 again. But when you sign your contract, there could be a clause in there that says if your guest count falls below let's say like 125, you'll still be responsible for a certain percentage of the difference. So you'll still be responsible for paying, say example, like 50% of the guests that fall below 125. I hope that makes sense for you guys. It's really hard to demonstrate without like a specific example in front of me, but just the basic point of this is always make sure that you read that information very well, and even make a note for yourself, maybe highlight it on your contract, put in Google alerts on like your Google Calendar or whatever calendar that you do use, and just make sure that you really stay on top of that, because the last thing that you want is 2 weeks before your wedding and your venue has contacted you saying, you know what, we didn't get an expected guest count from you or a final guest count, and we're going to go ahead and charge you this full amount for how many guests you originally signed for. And unfortunately, I have seen that happen to people in the past, and it just completely breaks my heart. It sucks overall, because you know, the brides and grooms can get really stressed out during the planning process, and they can easily overlook something like that. So I just like to stress to all of my clients that you really, really pay attention to that, because the last thing you want is to be owing a few extra $1,000s, especially when you hadn't budgeted for it. So usually venues and caterers will be nice enough to send you like a warning saying, you know, if we don't get your guest count by this date, we're going to have to go ahead and charge you the full amount. So that is definitely a courtesy, but I do want to stress that venues don't do this to rip you off by any means. I'm definitely not saying that. They just really need to make sure that they order enough food and beverage for your wedding, and then if they don't hear from you, they're not going to be able to order that stuff in time, which means that they're going to be under serious crunch time for your wedding as well, as far as providing the service that you expect from them. And if you don't update them on that correct amount, they could end up losing money. So it really is a business transaction. You just have to make sure that you're not taking it personally. It's just that you have to make sure that the venue is obviously making money and that you're following the guidelines that are listed in your contract. So I hope that makes sense for you. Another clause that you should really pay attention to are any specific setup instructions on your venue contract. There really typically is a list of things that clearly say specific setup instructions or things to look out for, just anything like that. The most common one that I see on contracts is no open flames. So you really want to pay attention to that. If you did want open flames in your venue, you're either going to have to rethink up a different idea if you really do want to stick with that one particular venue, or you'll want to think about going to a different venue that does allow open flames. I can say though that not a lot of venues do allow open flames, just because it can be a fire safety hazard. So just keep an eye out for that, and just keep that in mind as you are looking around for venues and looking over contracts. Another setup instruction might actually be they don't allow like things on the walls as far as like nailing things or tape or like thumbtacks, anything of that nature. This is actually also very common, so look out for that as well. If you plan on bringing in like a lot of DIY projects that you need to hang along the walls or string or whatever, you're going to want to make sure that you understand that information from your contract as well when you do look at a venue. And usually before you sign with a venue, they'll of course send over a sample contract. I mean, I know that I do that with my own SH Weddings clients, and just make sure that you fully understand those instructions before you do sign. So moving on, I think the other most important thing, not really important thing, but something that is often overlooked when you are signing your contract, specifically relates to vendors. Usually with vendors, most of the time they will specify some sort of meal preference. I know that I do this with my own clients as well, and this is something that I think a lot of vendors do just to actually help out your brides and grooms. Most of the time for vendors, anyone that's working over 6 hours, typically that's average. I'm not saying that's definite guideline or anything, but they do expect to be fed. So specifically wedding coordinators, of course, wedding planners, your photography, your videography, and oftentimes DJ will also require a meal. Keep an eye out for that and really do read it, because a lot of vendors will specifically require the same meal that you're serving the guests, where to be seated while they are eating, and if they have any dietary restrictions. So for example, in my contract for my SH Weddings clients, I do specifically state that both meals must be vegetarian, just because Josh, my husband, is a full vegetarian, and I'm just an incredibly picky meat eater. I only eat seafood and every once in a while beef, only if it's really high quality. So I just specifically put both meals must be vegetarian to make it easier on you guys specifically, so you're not having to worry about what to feed us. I do also state that it is preferential that we sit with the guests. That way if any problems do arise during dinner, we can kind of keep our eye on everything and make sure that we can troubleshoot if need be. Usually photographers and videographers will say the exact same thing, because if anything does happen on the spur of the moment that you're going to want a photo of, they're going to want to be there to capture it. Now, I'm not saying that this is always going to be the case. Obviously, if it's not possible for your vendors to sit with the rest of your guests, that's fine, but definitely keep an eye out, because some photographers, that is a deal breaker for them. So just keep that in mind when you are looking over your vendor contracts, and make notes of that in your master guest list spreadsheet or whatever you have, keeping track of just guests overall. Make sure that you do add in your vendors, and make sure you do find seating for them. I have been to weddings before where the bride just completely forgot about the vendors and they were just kind of walking around during dinner and they didn't have a meal and they didn't have a place to sit and they were really not happy. That's not to say that it will interfere with their work, because when it comes down to it, they want to provide you with obviously high quality work, but you really want to keep your vendors happy, trust me. It just makes the world of difference. So those are a few things to keep in mind when you are reading and signing your contracts. If you guys have any specific questions, please let me know in the comment section below and I'll do my best to address them in a future video possibly, or I'll just reply to you directly. I know that there are always tons and tons of questions out there specifically relating to certain contracts, so I can't really do a super long video addressing them all, but if there are some common issues coming up, I'd really be happy to make another video for you guys. So I hope that wasn't too much of a ramble for you. I can honestly tell you as of right now, after just kind of listening to myself talk, this is much better than the video that I recorded previously. So I'm really glad that I was able to redo this for you guys. So thank you so much for watching, and I hope that you're doing really, really well, and I will see you back here soon. Thanks so much. Bye.